Hello, I welcome you to this class again, Post 102, the course that I've tried to establish your knowledge of African politics, at least at introductory level, an introduction to African politics. This course I've been able to some extent try to explore the political systems and political activities, major actors on the continent of Africa, even before the coming of the colonial masters. Today we shall be looking at neocolonialism and African development. In fact, before neocolonialism, we'll start by looking at imperialism, neocolonialism, and by extension, African development. Why are we interested in imperialism? Because one of the evils that have taken place to the people and land of Africa is the imperial policies by a group of people who believe they are superior, who believe they have more knowledge, they are more sophisticated, they are more organized, they are more developed in their own way than Africa, and by extension try to impose their dominance. That's the meaning of imperialism. Imposition and dominance, an extension of domination of one territory to another. It is a feeling of superiority by a group that tries to now impose its will on another group. In this case, by the Europeans imposing and extending her dominance on the continent from Europe on the continent of Africa. We have discussed in the course of this our study that Africa was developing at its own space and time, according to Walter Rodney, the great historian of African descent, of African source, define development. This is development as the process of improvement of qualitative and qualitative improvement of the people, of a people over time and space. Emphasis on time and space. Now, time and space, because every society have developed means of solving its problem, peculiar problem. So if a society is able to solve its problem, that means the society cannot be described as being underdeveloped. To Rodney, the society is developed because time, as at that time, Africans had developed means of solving her political needs, of solving a political problem, meeting an economic need, and even organizing herself as a continent socially. However, when the contact through imperial domination that started as far back as what they call slavery, the slave era, where they first came to buy human beings, to buy African, able-bodied men and women of African descent were shipped to Europe and America. Over 10 million of them, as far as history could record, were taken out of the coast of Africa just to help in developing the European economy. Now, after struggles by Africans, both within and outside the continent, for years, agitating against colonialism. Imperialism is broader than colonialism. Imperialism is a domination that cut across economy, social, political, cultural, and other form of domination by Britain, by Russia, by Portugal, by Spain, by Italy, by Belgium on the continent of Africa. This is a general form of exploitation, domination, alienation, and subjugation of the continent. But the aspect of it that we took in the last session was colonialism. Colonialism is an aspect of imperialism which focuses on political domination, because politics take preeminence in the organization of the society. When the leaders have been captured, when the political system have been captured, then it will be very easy to explore every structure of the society, be it economy, be it law, be it religion, and so on and so forth. In fact, the ideas that come from the society are easily exploited when political exploitation have been established. So the Africans, both within and outside the continent, agitated. Some agitated subtly, they were writing, they were engaging the colonial masters, negotiating for African independence. While it went violence in some instances, in some places, the struggle for independence was not like it was in places like Nigeria, for instance, where we are holding constitutional conferences trying to persuade the British colonial authority to grant us independence. After their exit, then came independence. From late 1950s all through to 1970s, African societies were celebrating their freedom from colonial domination. They were celebrating their victory over colonialism. However, a new form of colonialism set in. A new form of colonial exploitation of the independent states came in, and that was described as new colonialism. The re-exploitation of the hitherto colonized territories who have attained independence by the former colonial masters. Then, looking at the importance of the colonies. The colonies, you remember, were the extension of the market of the colonial masters. They were bringing their substandard goods to take away the raw materials, the invaluable raw materials from the continent. But what happened when they now were forced, some of them were forced to grant independence to these territories. So after independence, there was need to maintain that relationship, the relationship that will seal and solidify the exploitation of the continent. That is what we refer to as neo-colonialism. What are the characteristics of neo-colonial states? Because after colonialism, after independence, after the issue of flag, the exchange of flag, then the neo-colonial state had certain features. The colonial authorities who had given independence to this society that we have now called independent state. Nigeria, for instance, celebrated our independence on October 1st, 1960. However, that celebration did not mean that Britain was not interested in the control and domination of Nigeria. So how did the colonial control of Britain, of Nigeria by Britain, continue? One, leadership. Puppet leadership were introduced. The leadership of Africa that took charge of the affairs of Africa after the exit of the colonial master were those that were imposed either directly or indirectly on the people. Elections that were delegated by the colonial masters were conducted so as to ensure that the colonial agent in African descent or of African descent became the president or prime minister of the African territories. That's the first nature of the colonial state of Africa. Two, the states were controlled, they were incorporated into the world capitalist economy through the instrumentality of international financial institutions. The first thing they did was, after giving independence, in fact, some of them pulled out for a while, looking at how the African leaders who were majorly puppets or their stooges were able to push the continent or their countries further. But looking at the space to which some of them were growing, You remember the way Kwame Nkrumah was trying to reform Ghana? You know how Julius Nyerere was trying to place Tanzania on the Global Development Index? Yes. The next thing was for them to now be incorporated into the world international financial system. What happened? The IMF and World Bank came into existence, and they came to Africa to introduce loans. African economies were now introduced, now became indebted economies. Loans and grants were given to African countries. By that loan, and their conditionalities, Africa's development template were now driven by IMF and World Bank. The conditionalities were to help in making sure that policies and programs that would help to push the development of Africa were not determined by African leaders, but those were drafted by their agents using the instrumentality of IMF and World Bank. You remember the popular structural adjustment program of Nigeria under the Ibrahim Babangida administration, where the conditionalities will include government should keep off from providing certain services. In fact, government were asked to deregulate, remove subsidy, whereas it was not part of African culture that we should not help ourselves. So the neo-colonial state was officially introduced to the global capitalist economic system, where exploitation, both internally and externally, became prominent. Africa was exploited internally. Internally, I will let you know how. The leaders, and if both economic, religious, and political leaders that took charge of Africa were the stooges of the hitherto colonial masters. So their policies were driven by what had been drafted or handed over to them from Europe and America. So what they were just doing was they were like merchants. They constituted themselves into a class of comprador bourgeoisie. They were just exchanging African wealth for the substandard goods of Europe and America. Externally, the colonial companies that were in existence before, the external exploitation of Africa that continue under neocolonialism now, they were in existence before in times of the multinational corporations. They came to transform in themselves, opening and establishing branches and maintaining it using Africans. Most of the African billionaires that you see today, they were not like the bourgeois, we call them bourgeoisie, but in the real political term of it, they are nothing but comprador bourgeoisies. Only national bourgeoisie in Europe own industries and drive development, whereas the comprador bourgeoisies are just agents that help in the re-exploitation of the continent of Africa. So the neo-colonial state became politically unstable. Politically unstable in the sense that they had leadership contentions, marginalization of one group by the other. Under colonialism, the fight was, or the battle line was between the blacks and whites. But when the whites left, they left a system whereby the blacks were divided among themselves. You now have tribes, religions, and ethnic groups dominating others. And what was the result? Instability in the political system. In fact, before you know it, military rule came into existence. You see military men taking over the leadership of the African countries. Virtually almost all African countries have had experiences of military coup, one experience of military coup or the other, even up until now. Don't be surprised. What you are having is the symptom of neo-colonial African societies, African states. The states in Africa became totally polarized, having been forced to enter into the world capitalist system unprepared. Capitalism is not a system of, it's not an economic system that a country goes into without full preparation. In fact, in the Marxian historical dialectical materialism, where the society is to move from one epoch to another, you discover that the incorporation of Africa into the world capitalist system was done without the full preparation of Africa. So Africa, the consumption level of African country became fully established. Now, looking at what Rodney described as development, that it is defined by the qualitative and quantitative lifestyle of a people based on time and space, you discover that before the incursion of Africa by the imperialists, Africa was developing at its own pace. So all the underdevelopment theoreticians from Andagoda Frank, Walter Rodney, Samuel Amir, Amilcar Cabral, Frank Fanon, all their writers have been able to establish the fact that Africa was on course to development. Africa was on its journey to development, developing at its own pace until the coming or the alteration of this progress by the advent of the imperialists who became colonialists and neo-colonialists of the continent. Until I see you next time, remain a good African citizen. Thank you.